The neighbor who took a sledgehammer to my $90,000 car. I'll be honest with you, I never thought I'd be the type to join an HOA. But when you find a house you love in a neighborhood you want to stay in, sometimes you play by the rules. And for years, I did exactly that. Now, if you know anything about me, you know I love cars. Not in a reckless, street racing way. I just appreciate a well-made machine. So when I finally had the money saved up and the timing felt right, I bought myself a Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat. Fully loaded, it came to about $90,000. It wasn't a Ferrari, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. The exhaust had some growl to it. That's part of what you're paying for with a car like that, but I wasn't out there revving it at midnight or doing burnouts in the cul-de-sac. Enter my neighbor. I'll call her Karen, because honestly, no other name fits better. She wasn't on the HOA board. She had no official title, no authority, no jurisdiction. But she acted like she ran the whole neighborhood. Over the years, I'd been cited, through her, for my lawn being cut too short. Too short. The same woman who'd complained the previous season that it was too long. I'd learned to manage her by keeping a low profile and nodding politely when she cornered me near the mailboxes. But the Hellcat changed things. She started showing up outside my house, taking photographs of the car while it sat parked in the driveway. Photographs of a parked, silent car. She slid notes under my windshield about noise pollution, neighborhood image, and crime statistics she'd almost certainly invented. She threatened to bring the matter to the HOA president. I reviewed the bylaws thoroughly and found exactly zero language about exhaust noise. The only noise rule was a standard quiet hours ordinance after 11:30 p.m. I wasn't in violation of anything. I thought it was a stalemate. I was wrong. One afternoon I was at my computer when I heard the unmistakable sound of my car alarm, followed by something that made my stomach drop, a heavy, metallic crash. By the time I got outside, Karen was in my driveway with a sledgehammer, and she'd already done considerable damage. Doors dented. Hood caved in. Windshield gone. The exhaust pipe she found so offensive was bent sideways, barely holding on. She stopped when I came out, after one final swing, just for emphasis, and told me, completely without shame, that the HOA bylaws had given her the authority to quiet the problem. She genuinely believed she'd done something righteous. I stood there circling the car for what felt like 10 minutes. I don't have the words to describe what it feels like to watch something you worked years for get destroyed in an afternoon. I called my brother. I took photos. And then, when the initial shock started to lift, I got focused. I went straight to the HOA board president and confirmed that Karen had acted entirely on her own. No board had authorized her, no complaint had gone through proper channels. I filed a police report. One of my neighbors, it turned out, had watched the whole thing from their front yard and was willing to testify. Karen, for her part, made no attempt to deny what she'd done. She was proud of it. Several months later, Karen was charged with felony vandalism. Her attorney negotiated a plea to probation, but she was ordered to pay full restitution, every dollar of repair costs, plus additional compensation for the harassment. The HOA put her on formal notice. One more incident and she would be removed from the community. It took months to get the car back to factory condition. Insurance negotiations, sourcing parts, coordinating with the body shop. But the day I picked it up, I felt something settle in me that had been unsettled since that afternoon. Every time I start the engine now, I think about how it played out. I followed the rules, I documented everything, I let the system work, and I won. Sometimes that's all the revenge you need. #story 2. I found the box he said I'd destroyed, and I returned it. My marriage had problems from the start. We were both in our 30s, which I mentioned because we were old enough to know better. One of his favorite weapons was my educational background. I'd attended a strong undergraduate program and was partway through an excellent graduate school. He'd gone to one of those elite universities that produces a particular kind of graduate, accomplished, yes, but often carrying a chip the size of a cinder block. That was his edge over me, and he used it. He had a cardboard box in the attic, no lock, nothing special, full of college memorabilia. Photos, keepsakes, letters from old friends he'd mostly lost touch with. A normal couple might sit down with those things and swap stories. I would have been happy to listen. But over time, the box became something else entirely. He forbade me from looking in it. Told me, in so many words, that I wasn't good enough for what was inside. If you've ever been in a relationship with someone like that, You know how that kind of statement lodges itself in your chest and starts to calcify. It came up in every argument, a symbol of everything he thought I wasn't. Then one day he went up to the attic and the box was gone. He decided I'd thrown it away out of jealousy. I hadn't. But after years of that kind of relationship, I'd been ground down enough that I started to believe maybe I had. That's what sustained emotional abuse does. It makes you doubt your own memory. We divorced. I did the work, healed, rebuilt my life, and found a good partner who treats me with basic human decency. Years later, when I sold the house, which had been mine before the marriage, I found the box while packing up the attic. I sat down on the floor and cried. My boyfriend sat with me without asking too many questions. It was a lot to process. I called a mutual friend and arranged to have the box returned to my ex-husband. But before I handed it over, I slipped in two things: copies of unpublished essays I'd written about what he'd put me through, and a handwritten note letting him know I'd also sold his Dungeons and Dragons books. If he complains to anyone, he'll have to explain the essays. And I'd love to see the man who spent a decade belittling my education try to tell someone, with a straight face, that his ex-wife sold his D&D books 12 years after the divorce. Story 3. I asked for 3 days off. They demanded a doctor's note. Now I have 6 weeks. My job is demanding, genuinely, not just in the way people say when they mean they work a lot of hours. It requires a level of emotional output that adds up over time, and I have my own mental health history that I manage carefully. 4 years, I've compensated by overcommitting. It's hard to say no when you care about the work and the people depending on you. A few weeks ago, I hit a wall. Not dramatically, it crept up on me. I recognize the signs because I've learned to watch for them, and I did the responsible thing. I went to my supervisor and asked for 3 days off, explaining why: burnout, mental health, I needed a reset. With a weekend following those 3 days, I thought it might be enough. What followed was a negotiation I shouldn't have needed to have. They could give me 2 of the 3 days, but not the third. Could I shift which days? They'd look into it. While they were looking into it, they texted to ask if I could cover additional shifts. I declined. The next response: we can cover 2 days, but you'll need to make up the hours. I called them. They had me on speaker. I was crying. I explained everything again: the therapy, the burnout, the fact that I had spoken with my doctor the day before and he had confirmed I was showing signs of serious stress and had recommended time off. The moment I mentioned my doctor, the conversation shifted. We'll need a doctor's note, they said. Fine. I had a follow-up appointment already scheduled. I went. My doctor looked at me, really looked at me, and put me on 2 weeks of immediate leave. I handed in the note. 2 weeks later, I went back. He extended the leave for at least another month. They didn't say much when they got that paperwork. One of them wouldn't meet my eyes. The other said, flatly, "Oh, doctor's note. Thanks." I asked for 3 days. They pushed back one time too many. Now I have 6 weeks to actually recover, fully covered, exactly as I should have been from the beginning. Story 4. How I took down a corrupt HOA president by the book. When I moved into my neighborhood, I was looking for exactly what most people are looking for: a well-kept community, reasonable neighbors, and a quiet life. What I got instead was Todd. Todd was the HOA president, and he ran the place like a small-time autocrat. He fined residents $200 for leaving trash cans out past 9 a.m., while his own yard featured unpermitted structures and a fence that violated city ordinances. He ruled by intimidation, burying opponents in paperwork and pushing through board votes when only his allies were in the room. My own introduction to Todd came when my fence needed restaining. The approved color wasn't available at any local supplier, so I used the closest match I could find. Todd fined me $500. I provided receipts, explained the situation, and asked for reasonable accommodation. He smiled and said, "Rules are rules," and walked away. That was the moment I decided to take him down. Not through arguments or public spectacle, methodically, legally, and completely. I volunteered for the HOA board. For 2 years, I attended every meeting, took careful notes, and kept my head down. I was patient. I watched how he operated. And then I noticed something that went beyond petty power grabs. The finances didn't add up. HOA fees in our neighborhood were significantly higher than in comparable communities nearby. But the pool was closed half the summer. The landscaping was neglected. When I asked for the budget at a meeting, Todd laughed it off. When I filed a formal request for financial records, which he was legally required to provide, weeks passed with no response. I started talking to neighbors. Over a dozen homeowners had requested the same records over the years and been ignored. One had seen HOA funds used for work on Todd's personal property. Armed with their accounts, I filed a formal complaint that forced Todd to hand over the documents. When he finally did, the picture was damning. Invoices missing. Expenses mislabeled. A $15,000 landscaping payment to a company that didn't exist. I cross-referenced the bank statements with public records and found the smoking gun. Todd had been routing HOA money into personal accounts and inflating contractor invoices, splitting the difference with a contractor friend who handled most of the community's maintenance work. I compiled everything, spreadsheets, photographs, notarized neighbor statements, into a detailed report. Then I waited for the annual HOA meeting. Normally a sparsely attended formality, this one was standing room only. I'd spent weeks quietly knocking on doors, sharing just enough to bring people in. When Todd began his usual remarks about how much he'd sacrificed for the community, I stood up and asked him to explain the discrepancies. He tried to shut it down. It was too late. I distributed copies of the report to everyone in the room. By the end of the night, the board had voted to remove him. An independent auditor confirmed what I'd found. Over $50,000 embezzled, tens of thousands more mismanaged. We filed a police report and a civil suit. Todd eventually had to sell his house to cover restitution and legal fees. His contractor associate was barred from doing business in the county. We restructured the HOA entirely. Term limits, multi-signature financial approval, a public online portal for budgets and meeting minutes. The pool is open. The landscaping is maintained. The fees are lower than they've been in years. Todd reportedly moved to another town and attempted to join a different HOA board. Someone Googled his name before the meeting. Justice, when you're patient enough to pursue it properly, has a way of arriving exactly where it should. Story 5. My neighbor harassed families out of this neighborhood for years. I was his last target. I've lived in my house for 9 years. My neighbor, an older gentleman whose temperament I will describe charitably as relentlessly unpleasant, had a documented history of harassing families until they moved. Noise complaints, police calls for grass an inch too long. If there was a mechanism for making someone's life difficult, he used it. For years I absorbed it. Then he mounted a camera on his privacy fence, aimed directly into my backyard. And he threatened my dogs, who were never outside unsupervised and never off leash, saying he'd shoot them if they bothered him. That was enough. I spent an evening signing his address up for every mailing list I could find. Religious organizations of every persuasion, political newsletters, catalogs for products he'd find deeply uncomfortable. I ordered an anonymous delivery of a 5-pound box of, let's say, natural fertilizer from a novelty service. I was home the day it arrived. The letter carrier carried it at arm's length and practically tossed it onto his porch. His reaction, when he came out to collect it, was everything I'd hoped for. Then I got creative. Around 11 o'clock one night, I set up in my carport, which sits about 10 feet from his bedroom wall, with a speaker system and proceeded to blast Swedish heavy metal at considerable volume while building a sign from corrugated metal and large wooden letters. When I spotted a police cruiser making its way down the street, I turned off the lights and music and went inside for 20 minutes. The officer found nothing to act on and left. I resumed. The finished sign read, simply, F off. I mounted it on an old swing set frame, positioned to face directly into his camera's field of view. The camera came down the next day. In the 2 years since, I haven't received a single police call, a single complaint, or any contact from him whatsoever. Sometimes the only language a bully understands is the one they taught you. Story 6. My coworker decided to take it easy. So I help him stay busy. We were slammed at the store, the kind of afternoon where everyone is moving fast and nobody has time to stop. 4 of us were on shift, the shift lead handling management tasks, 2 of us covering our assigned areas, and a 4th colleague, I'll call him K, who was on overtime and had been given one of the easiest tasks of the day. It should have taken 30 minutes, tops. K spent an hour and 45 minutes in the restroom with his phone. The rest of us ran ourselves ragged covering the registers and finishing our own work. By the time we wrapped up our tasks, a large delivery arrived, the kind with heavy cages that need to be hauled in from the truck. Normally, I would have offered to help with that. Not today. I turned to the shift lead and mentioned, casually, that if Kay helped bring in the delivery, I'd have time to do a backstock scan that the previous day's team hadn't gotten to. Kay couldn't find a reason to object fast enough. He spent the next stretch hauling heavy cages in the rain. It had started pouring the moment he stepped outside, and came back exhausted and soaked while the rest of us finished up dry and in good spirits. If you'd done your share of the work, I would have never volunteered you. But you made your choice, and I made mine.